Good afternoon, good evening all, it's Bear here. And I'd like to welcome you to my YouTube channel, aboxwithnolid. A channel that I'm creating to not only to just bring awareness to the day-to-day reality of complex trauma creates, but also exploring ways to help improve your quality of life. And also with the ultimate goal of healing, actually healing trauma. Now, in continuing on in this video with the mechanics, all the different inner workings behind your responses to trauma, I want to go back and have a look at the reoccurring patterns and exploring a little deeper, but also from another little perspective around that has a very powerful component in our day-to-day lives. And that revolves around the decisions that we make all the time. If we got a pen and paper out and jotted down a line for every decision we make throughout the day, you'll be astounded at how many decisions we just automatically make. And I just want to bring a little bit of awareness to those and start to look at what those decisions are actually constructing. Now, take a moment and think about a person. They've been locked in a 5x9 cell for 10 years. They're in that cell 23 out of 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And to fill time, they pace backwards and forwards. There's a set number of paces this direction and a set number of paces this direction. And they do that for 10 years. Now it is completely understandable how muscle memory that becomes, how automatic that becomes. And upon release, even though they could be in a warehouse with an unbelievable amount of space, they will still habitually do the same backwards and forwards in the same distance. Now take that concept and look at it from the perspective of the decisions that you make. What are we constructing? Now, one of the things most people don't realize that the environment that we were in immediately post, the dominant environment we were in post traumatic experiences and what we went through. And if you're looking at pre-verbal and early childhood, that's, the home you were in. That ecology, you built a metaphorical 5x9 box. And within that box is what you were able to control. Within that box is what you were able to predict. And what resources you create, everything is contained within that metaphorical 5x9 box. And for many of us, that 5x9 box is in the very environment that we were abused in. And like the cell analogy, we habituated into what we could do, what we could constructively do to fill in time, to prevent things from happening, to prepare for things to happen, to protect things to happen, to block memories and to function, to basically survive. And this 5x9 box is what I want to have a look at, because what is behind the repeating patterns is that 5x9 box and all the restrictions, limitations that it created within us in the way we think, the way we responded, what we learned, what we didn't learn, so forth and so forth. And in exploring that, and when you look at the sheer amount of decisions that you make in a day, and when you sit back and look, you can start to see how we create this predictability. Now, looking at a 5x9, that 5x9 analogy, our nervous system knows that space we can control. We know what can come in and what can leave that space. That 5x9 analogy, we know the sounds, we know the smells, the textures, and everything contained within it immediately post-trauma. We assess that environment and the size of that environment and what the amount of things that we monitored is dictated by the environment that we were in, immediate dominant environment we were in immediately post-trauma, what we were in the most. For some, that may be a hospital. For others, it may be a home. For some, it may be a basement, wherever. Every person has this unique environment, but I can guarantee you that due to the overwhelming nature of trauma and our traumatic responses, we have a very limited and confined box within that environment that we've created this survival structure from. When we look at trauma, so much comes down to very black and white, and that's because that is what we can dictate, what we can control, or what we can know. The more grey areas that are there is the less predictable things become, the more on edge and the more triggered we are. So using this 5x9 analogy, I find it is helpful to give you the perspective. I'm not intending this to trigger, but for me, as I said, the name of this channel is A Box With No Lid. It's that crib that I was placed in when I was taken from my mother. That plastic box. That's a 5x9 box. We all have this box that the places we were left to when nothing happened. We may have been waiting for stuff to happen, but nothing happened. So we created this 5x9 box. And I know I'm really going at this one because I've watched so many people for so long. We start to do these positive steps on the things that we are consciously acting upon. And then I've watched all these little decisions unravel those positive steps, recreating this negative self-fulfilling prophecy. I watched, the courage people who have gone through hell, and they get this sudden spurt of motivation and this opportunity, and I've watched all these little, not really thought of and non-conscious decisions unravel it. And honestly, it breaks my heart to see it. And that's why I've wrestled with this one and how to word this video particularly, in this part 1 and part 2, because it is such a core thing and a very triggering thing. But we really need to grasp its understanding and its importance, because the decisions that we think about, the big ones, don't really amount to much. It's all these little ones that we do that are always going back to recreating that metaphorical 5x9 box. So take the time and look at what your decisions create. That's what you eat, how you prepare your food, where you go, what you do. How many times you go back and check that you've locked the windows and doors. How many times you go back and check that the stove is off. All these little things that we all habitually do because of what we've been through. Feed the recreation of this box, this 5x9 box. And as I said in part 2 of this, I want to start to explore ways we can work with it. But I just want to really emphasize and bring your attention to looking at what all these little decisions and choices are creating for yourself. And as I said, the challenge with this as well, on top is our society, our physical world, loves to reinforce the box. We are completely surrounded by all these things in our physical surroundings that reinforce subliminally our 5x9 box. So, with this in mind, please watch part 2, because I want to explore ways of working with this. But first up, have a look at what all these little choices and decisions are creating and how they reinforce your survival state. Jot them down. Keep them in mind when you watch part 2. So as always, I love your feedback and comments. I love, any questions you have to ask, and I'll see you shortly in part 2.